Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Most of us have experienced grief from time to time. But what happens when a loss is so devastating we have no clue how to go on, or even if we want to? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the Exxon Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to chart our course through adversity and grief is Dr. Ken Druck. Ken is one of the world's leading experts on grief and resilience. Since losing his own daughter in a tragic accident and working with families after 9/11, Sandy Hook, and Columbine, he's dedicated his life to providing roadmaps of getting through life's most daunting and difficult times and navigating its daily up and downs. Dr. Ken is a best-selling author of several books, including his most recent, How Do We Go On? Self-Compassion, Courage, and Gratitude on the Path Forward. His website, kendruck.com. Dr. Ken, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you so much for honoring me with this beautiful invitation to spend this morning with you.
Well, this is a huge topic that we're all kind of rolling with at this time. There's so many changes and losses in the world. How many types of grief are there, sir?
Well, there are an unlimited number of griefs. When we say griefs, we talk about sorrows. You know, how many different kinds of sorrows are there in this life? It's like asking how many different kinds of joys are there? Unspeakable, unlimited. And unfortunately, we experience all kinds of grief. And grief can come from the actual loss of a loved one. As you shared, I lost my beautiful daughter, Jenna, at age 21. And it's an unspeakable sorrow. It's the flip side of the love that we've allowed all the way into the depths of our heart and soul. And so in the depths of our heart and soul, we feel sadness. We feel confused, a profound confusion. We feel unsettled. We don't know how we're possibly going to go on in this life. How do we honor her in the way we live on? How do we honor our own life and the other people and the other blessings and gifts that are in our lives? And so that's that grief, but there's also the grief of the living losses that we suffer. Nobody's died, but we have a child who is estranged, or a child who's strung out on drugs or alcohol, or we're suffering it through a divorce. You know, after many years of trying to really make a relationship work, we've reconciled that it's not going to work, that it's no longer a fit for our life, or we've gotten a bad diagnosis, or we've lost our financial way, that the house that we lived in, or we're getting older and we look at our watch and we say, my goodness, I'm turning 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years old this week. You know, how do I go on with life realizing that there is an end to this lease? And how do I reconcile that? So there are so many different kinds. There's anticipatory grief. There's the grief that we're having in this moment, which can be paralyzing. And there's the grief of something that's been taking place over time that we're being asked to figure out, how am I going to go on? How do I go on from this moment, this unspeakable what now moment?
So when a person is first hit with a huge loss, very often their breath freezes. It's just like they totally freeze. How many stages are there of grief, and how do we move from each one?
Well, I think there's no cookie cutter for how we move through in stages or steps. There are seasons of grief, and in the beginning, as you said, you know, especially if we've suffered a traumatic loss. You know, my phone rang at 10 o'clock at night from the State Department telling me my daughter, who was on a study abroad program, had died in a bus accident.
Mm.
How could I not be frozen? My system, we're not built to accommodate that kind of truth and honesty and reality. The shock of it sends us into actually a good paralysis called shock, where we can modulate in steps what we're going through. But we are the medical equivalent of that would be being in the ICU on emergency with getting assistance, breathing,
Mhm.
functioning. And after that kind of a traumatic loss, we're in crisis mode for a while. And we're not used to it. A lot of us are go-getters. It's like, let me get out, let me positive think my way through this. Let me think about all the other things so I don't have to feel this. And yet the very thing that we most need is permission from ourselves to go through the unbearable, to bear the unbearable sorrow, confusion of the moment with our hand on our heart, the hand of kindness and patience, of understanding, of support, of encouragement, to tell ourselves, we're going to get through this. We just need to breathe. We need to be patient with ourselves. We can't be in crisis mode trying to figure everything out right away and solve this and get rid of this, lift ourselves up from this. So I think the first stage and step is that permission. The second is to understand that we're in a challenging moment of self-care like we've never experienced probably, and that we need to upgrade our self-care. It's not enough to get a mani and a pedi. And as encouraging as people want to be with us, telling us, oh, it's all going to be okay and you're going to be all right. And, or isn't your daughter in a better place? And, and with all this encouragement and inspiration, that's not what we need. What we need is to understand that we're in a moment of self-care. We need to take better care of ourselves than we ever have. Again, with our hand on our heart, learning what do I need to do? Maybe I need to go for a short walk. Maybe I need to keep drinking and eating. Maybe I need to surround myself with the people who aren't telling me what to do, but asking me how I am. So there's a whole self-care protocol that we need to go into. And yet most of us find moments with our foot on our throat, not our hand on our heart. And the foot on the throat says, come on, figure this out. You're not being positive enough. Where's your faith? Don't you have faith? There's all kinds of admonitions and condemnation and criticism with our foot on our throat. And we need to move that foot from our throat and put our hand on our heart.
It seems that there isn't a real good provision in our society anymore for grief. When we were in a tribal community, there was a set way that we dealt with it. Like, say, the Lakota, the medicine
Yes.
person would hold the spirit of the dead for a full year, and everybody would grieve through every season of that full year, and then they would release them, and the person's name wasn't spoken again. But every society has their own rendition. But anymore, we've become such a mixed bag that we've kind of lost our rituals and our traditions to support the grieving process. Are we unprocessed with grief, and what impact is that having on us as a culture as well as
Well,
individuals?
when we don't process and saying, hey, going through what we're going through, finding trusted confidants who can be with us, not try to figure out and fix us. But when we don't go through and process the grief and allow ourselves the seasons of loss, of grieving a loss, what do we do? What happens to us? We become indifferent to the pain, to not only our own pain, we become indifferent to the pain of other people. Some people ask me, Ken, how has it changed you to grieve the loss of your daughter and to go through losses, to have coordinated bereavement after 9/11 in New York and California? What was it like to sit with the Sandy Hook families? And I tell them that my trip to the bottom of pain showed me compassion for the suffering of other people, a compassion that I never as deeply understood. And that was the gift, the dark gift that I was going to take from what I had gone through, is to really allow myself to be with other people, not to turn away in an avoidant way from my own sorrow, because when we embrace ourselves and when we give ourselves compassion with that hand on our heart, guess what? We become compassionate and understanding and supportive of other people. Our capacity to be with them, to understand, to be patient, not to give people admonitions and hidden messages like, well, do you have any other kids? Or to say things that really give people the sense that they are alone, that they're now, not only have they lost somebody they love, they've lost the world. They've lost people who understand and who are willing to walk and talk and stand with them through this moment that they are going to get through, but it's going to happen organically in the way that we heal. And if we have a ritual and a tradition and something we can follow that's helping us, then we can do that. If we need to make up something, like I learned that, my sister and her husband, of all people, showed up 2 weeks after my daughter died, and they bought me a kayak. I live on the ocean in San Diego, and they bought me a kayak, and I started taking the kayak out every day. And it was part of me being able to get out in the ocean, in the natural world. And I find being in nature speaks to my sorrow in such a healing and comforting way, and helping me understand the nature of this universe that I live in, of the natural world. Yeah.
Well, it's
So,
that magic
yeah.
moment, Ken. We're going to have to take a station break. Ken and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. How can we find our way through grief? With us this hour discussing grief is Dr. Ken Druck. Ken is the author of How We Go On: Self-Compassion, Courage, and Gratitude on the Path Forward. Ken, when very often when we're hit with grief, we try to sideline it and go on with our lives. And then the next time we're hit with grief, it stirs up the old grief plus the new grief, and we try to sideline both of them. Eventually, what's the result of trying to put grief into denial versus moving through it?
Well, when we hide, deny, repress, avoid, rather than encounter our grief, allow our grief, listen to our grief, our sorrow, as well as our joy. This isn't only about grief and sorrow and about the dark moments in our lives. It's about the opportunities as well. You know, we,
Isn't our ability to feel that joy limited by our processing of our
yes,
grief?
yes,
It's kind
yes.
of like a sine wave, isn't it?
Yeah,
One
yeah.
limits the
And
other.
we get stuck in that loop, telling ourselves the same thing over and over again. I start my day, I don't know how you start your day, but I start my day asking myself, I go on my meditation walk, and I start my day with 4 questions. The first one is, what's weighing most heavily on my heart today? Today, what's weighing most heavily on my heart? And then it's, today, what's making my heart sing? And today, what is today as an opportunity to either let go of something that I've been dragging along with me, or to embrace something that opens the door of greater possibilities to me understanding and going on with my life. So I start the day that way, to cultivate that awareness so I can make the most of every day.
There's a hidden gift behind every sorrow if you can find it. How does one find that hidden gift?
I think by listening to our own hearts. Some of us are filling in every moment and every space with other people's ideas, with noise, with distractions, with diversions, with addictions, with whatever. And there's no time to stop and to listen to our own heartbeat, listen to nature, listen to music, the comfort of music. Some of the greatest music in history was written by great, great composers and singer-songwriters in their moment of deepest despair. To find their way through the despair, they were listening to themselves. Now we listen to their music, whether it's Mozart or Brahms or whatever, Chopin's nocturnes. They're great. It's how sorrow evolves. One of my favorite artists is a woman named Keiko Matsui. And Keiko writes music that takes us through the spectrum of sorrow, that that evolves into joy and gratitude and courage.
How large a part does gratitude play? I mean, it's doggone hard to be grateful for a loss, but can we transmute that loss by finding the gratitude?
Yeah, I think so. I think, if we try to replacing doesn't work. It's like with the person who said to me, "Well, don't you have another daughter?" It's like, "Oh my God, all this time I've been so sad. How could I have been so sad? I have another one at home." You know, you don't replace our hearts. We walk with a limp in our hearts. We have a hole in our hearts from the losses we've suffered. But we have big hearts. We have all this other real estate to navigate in our hearts. So if we allow ourselves the expression, the constructive expression of our sorrows, of our anger sometimes, of our confusion, allowing ourselves, even the emptiness. Part of being human means feeling empty sometimes. If we allow our emptiness, guess what's right behind it? Fullness, a newfound fullness. And for me, one of the most important things is understanding the love that never dies. So
And that is beautiful because even though our loved ones are gone, if we can maintain our love for them, they never die in a certain way, do they?
my daughter, I wear this hineni, this jewel. I wear it every day. And hineni, and he is a Hebrew word for here I am,
Mm-hmm.
the presence of spirit. And sometimes just touching that and saying, you know what? We live in this grand mystery. We have Neil deGrasse Tyson reminding us that we don't just live in a universe. There are universes as we understand, as we explore the greater space. And here we are flying through space on not even a grain of sand, in the middle of this grand mystery. Will I allow myself to venture into this mystery, or do I close the door shut on my own heart, on all the greater possibilities? And I hold my daughter in my heart every day. I continue to say the I love yous. Do I understand with 100% certainty the nature of life and death? No, I don't. I bet my faith. I bet the possibilities. If there's a million and one chance that she can hear me say and know my love prevails and hear me say, I love you, Jenna, then I'll bet that. And rather than going into the feeling like, oh, I have the answer and there's nothing there and it's over, and taking that loop and wearing that thought, that being on that diet of thoughts every day.
Yeah. So you say something interesting. You call how we go on one of the most asked questions in human history. Would you explain that for us, please?
Yeah, yeah. We stand in a moment, all of us probably throughout history. If I had my grandparents here, if you had your grandparents here to ask questions, they would probably say that they felt they had lived at an inflection point, that things had changed so much in the world, things were changing so rapidly, and maybe they had to move here from another country. My relatives had to. The man for whom I named was buried in a mass grave after being killed by Hitler near Kiev in Ukraine. And, what must he have been thinking? How is he going to go on? How do we deal with having a tyrant whose heart is full of hatred, who's threatening millions and millions of people unless they completely follow his path? What's it like living in that kind of time? What's it like living in their country and their part of the world was being split apart, as many people feel our nation and our world is being split apart and fragmented and polarized? What's it like? How do I want to be part of the solution of that, rather than becoming a part of that problem, feeding that problem? So not only do we get older and we have to deal with different seasons of life, times of life, but the world changes and we have to feel, how do I want to be part of the solution and leave the world in a better place, leave a legacy of love for my grandchildren, my children, and future generations?
I think one of the challenges is going on without leaving a huge part of yourself behind in the loss. What advice do you have for people to try to achieve that?
Turn the pages of life. Sometimes we want to drag nostalgically, we want to drag our old identity. We want to drag the old way that we looked and moved and felt. We want to take that into the future. We judge that to be the best part of me. We wake up and we look in the mirror in the morning and we go, we look over there and say, look at you. You're so much older. What are those wrinkles? And didn't your hairline wasn't it once here? Or, look at you. You've got this great COVID beard now. What's that about? We can either talk to ourselves that way, or we can look over here and say, you know what? You are so beautiful to me. Look at you. You're the best version of you've ever been. You are more emotionally free. You're so much more loving and present than you've ever been. And how are we going to talk to ourselves when we look at ourselves in the mirror every day in that what now moment?
We're about out of time in this segment, but we tend to identify with our grief and almost be afraid to let go of it in certain regards. What causes that, and how can we get out of that little trap?
Well, if we feel that our sorrow is our only possible attachment to the person we've lost, when we've suffered a loss, what started as the unspeakable, unconditional love that's become an unspeakable sorrow wants to become love again. It wants to become a love again. So do we hold on to the sorrow because that attaches us to the person, to our feelings of losing them? Or do we allow ourselves to rise up from that sorrow, allow it its expression whenever it wants to speak, to listen? Sorrow, is that you? Are you speaking to me again? Is this a day where, my mom died a couple of years ago. I used to call her every morning and say, Mom, how's my favorite mother? Sometimes I still do that now. I'm in the car or I'm riding or I'm busy somewhere. I'll say, hey, how's my favorite mother? That's allowing my love to breathe. Allowing our love to breathe moves us into a different realm where we can feel the sorrow, but we can also feel the joy and the privilege of having had them and of the love that never dies, that lives on in us. And who knows where else it lives on and how else it lives on. And we stay open to those possibilities.
Staying open is a huge part of it, isn't it?
Yes, it
We,
is.
like I said, we're about out of time in this segment. When I come back, you've done some pretty interesting things with grieving people. I'd like to go into that a little bit and how that's altered your life. So this is Dr. Ken and I. We're going to come back on the other side of a break to discuss how grief can alter our lives. You stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Will time heal grief on its own, or is some action required from us? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing unprocessed grief is Dr. Ken Druck. His website, kendruck.com. Dr. Ken, we have touched on this, that if we don't process grief, we never move beyond it. But time doesn't just take care of that, does it? I mean, every time heals all things. Well, I've seen people 20, 30 years later, and the pain is as fresh as the day it happened. They've never moved beyond it. How can a person tell that that's where they are, and how can they start to move beyond it?
There are so many things that we can do to process grief. One of the things for people who are really stuck, and we understand that some grief occurs in time. It progresses in time, but there's a grief that is beyond time. So that sometimes I'll be walking down the street and I'll be walking, or I'll be in a movie theater, or I'll be somewhere, and I'll be walking behind a girl that has the same hair as my daughter, Jenna. And suddenly a sorrow in me. And suddenly I'm thinking, I wonder if had she lived, whether she would be she would have a love in her life, or whether she would have had kids, and what kind of an aunt she would have been. Her sister had twins, and how her sister would have felt so different not having lost a sister, and so on and so forth. So there's a grief that occurs outside of time. We could be triggered, but people who are stuck in their sorrow often find tremendous value if they can engage a trusted confidant, somebody who really knows how to listen. And that can be anybody. That can be a next door neighbor who's a
In
great listener, or it could be a therapist or a
in
coach.
but in order to listen and be there present with somebody in grief, don't we have to kind of have processed our own
I
so that
think
we can really be present?
the way to be present is to have gone through what we've all gone through, and we've all gone through it differently. The reason I still run support groups, I have partner loss support groups that I run. I have grief workshops that I give. Why do I bring people together 15, 20, 25, 40? Why do I speak in front of audiences at grief conventions? Because we find tremendous value listening to and learning from each other. People who've suffered comparable losses. It's like the question I ask is, name a couple of things you do that have been helping you. Rather than sitting and telling the stories about how miserable I still am and how stuck I still am and what's still wrong, and repeating that loop. It's like, let's listen to each other. You do that, you walk in nature, you listen to music, you take a yoga class, you go to church or a synagogue or a place of worship that gives you a deeper sense of the possibilities of how life does go on, and the ways that life can go on and love can go on, and how to live honorably, live out the rest of your own days. So everybody's different, and we all have to conduct our own investigation into, here's what's worked best for me. Here's what works best for me. And if I need help, some hand holding, or to be in the presence of somebody who's a professional, then I need to do that too. I need to be willing to go in and work with a grief professional, somebody who's probably gone through loss themselves, but who's also trained to assist you. They're a coach or a counselor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist who understands. Now, I teach grief literacy at places like the Harvard School of Public Health. And I train psychiatrists, young residents at the University of California. And it doesn't come automatically to mental health workers how to work with grieving people. You have to find somebody who's really trained, qualified, and in whose presence you feel safe, saying how it really is, being truly honest.
Well, now we're going to go on to the question that we ended the last segment with. How is working on the front lines after 9/11, Columbine, and Sandy Hook, and countless other tragedies, by the way, how has that influenced you in your work?
Well, Gwilda, one of the things that I realized after my daughter passed was that I wanted to honor her life and spirit. And I started a nonprofit foundation called the Jenna Druck Foundation. And the Jenna Druck Foundation started getting calls from not only people in our community, but people all over the world and all over the country. And I started getting called into tragic situations like several that you mentioned. And it was two things. Number one, it was a way to tell my daughter I love her. I have something called the 8 honorings, and one of them is to do something good in the name of the person you've lost. And so I felt like being with other people, sharing what I had learned on my journey to the bottom of pain, sharing that with other people would bring light to a very dark situation. So being with those families at Sandy Hook or after 9/11 or at Columbine or 100 other situations, I could bring light and understanding and a quiet listening and the gift of letting people know they weren't alone, and that other people with comparable losses can understand and share with them what they had done to help themselves. So that's number one. Number two, functionally, there were situations where, after 9/11, why do people only go back to their therapist or their clergy one time? That was the question. Why aren't people coming back? They're They're going to be going through this for years. Why are they only coming back? Because the clergy or the psychologist or psychiatrist who put a spin, let me put a big psychological spin on this. You got to think more positively. Or let me put a spiritual or religious spin on this. It's all okay. Here's what happens. I know, as though somebody knew with 100% certainty, rather than saying, let me hear what you have to say, what you're feeling, where you're finding faith, where you're finding courage and strength and the possibilities. So we had to retrain a lot of therapists about here's how to listen, here's how to draw somebody out, here's how to create a safe environment. And that was a way of honoring my daughter as well. And it was a way of giving my own life a sense of purpose again.
I have witnessed that in numerous people. Everybody deals with it differently. But the courage to immerse yourself in situations where other people are suffering loss, doesn't it bring up your old stuff, your old losses as well? Isn't it a difficult thing to do at first?
It's a difficult thing to do at first for many of us, and it's difficult in different ways. For me, I'm one of these guys who's a responder, kind of a first responder. I'm wired that way. So I go towards the fire. I go towards, is anybody in that burning building? And for me, it was meeting with the dads at ground zero, the dads of the firefighters who are firefighters themselves, who are in the rubble, and being with them and just talking with them. And for me, I would leave and I would go back to a hotel room or somewhere, and I would have my own tears. I would release my own tears. And I started learning how to take care of myself. I started learning what do people that could burn out and have compassion fatigue and work at helping other people, how do they burn out and how do they practice self-care? And I became an expert in my own self-care, how to care for myself, what to do, when to step back, when to take a break, how to balance my days. That's why I start every one of my days with a meditation walk, which is also an exercise walk. And I air out my head, the heaviness, but I also I clear space for joy, and I clear space for strength, the strength to stand with, and if you look, I tell parents when I do parent education training, I tell parents you tell the best parents by asking them to stick out their tongue. And if you see scar tissue on their tongue, they're a good parent. For all the times they bit their tongue and said, I need to be quiet and listen. And I've learned how to do that. The gift, I remembered how to do it. And I want to show you something. Can I show you something quickly?
Oh, we're just about out of time in this segment, so.
Well, this is a good close for the segment.
Okay.
This is what my 4-year-old grandson gave me yesterday.
Oh, how sweet.
He calls me Poppy because I listened to him, because I learned to bite my tongue as a grandfather and just listen and ask and help him think about his options.
And that's a huge thing, particularly for children, because we tend to lecture down to them. And right now we are in a crisis of suicide in our young. And do you think listening to them
Absolutely.
and would make a difference in that?
Helping them look at their own options rather than telling them, here are your options. I got this because I help him. He said, Poppy, I want to give you this trophy. You helped me so much. Because listening to them helps them. It comes from them. The answer comes from within them. And that's what we need to do. We don't need to enable kids. We need to evoke the awareness in them, help them see what their options are. I just came back from Japan. When you go down to the mass transit, there are now guardrails because so many of those kids are throwing themselves in front of trains. It's a horrific tragedy. Now there are guardrails in front of the mass transit when you go underground in Japan, but to help kids stop and think, this is an irreversible decision. Let's think about the fact that this pain is not going to go on forever. How you could lift yourself out of this pain, how you have that ability, and how I'm going to stand here right with you to help you do it.
That's a beautiful thing, is bringing out the answers in them. That brings their self-confidence out too, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, it is that magical moment. We're going to have to take another station break. Please stay with us as Dr. Ken and I continue to explore moving beyond the unthinkable. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Can we transmute grief? What are the alternatives? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Ken Druck. His website, kendruck.com. Ken, tell us about the resilience response.
You know, Gwilda, there's something in each one of us that we can tap into. Just as and we talked a little bit before about how there's a natural emptiness. There are moments in this life where we're just empty. And if you're a high achiever and you're used to pushing buttons and motivating yourself and inspiring yourself all the time, you'll miss that opportunity of that moment of emptiness. That moment of emptiness yields, if we stay calm and if we keep our hands on our heart, it yields a fullness and a new clarity. And sometimes we realize, my God, my emptiness is here to teach me that I'm filling up with all the wrong things, or things that disappear quickly, that I want a fullness in my life. I want to strengthen my relationship. I want to strengthen my body. I want to move. I want to embrace people. I want to strengthen my relationships. So whatever it is, there's also a resilience response. A part of us that it's the time. It's time. It's time for us to be resilient. It's not time for us to weigh ourselves down, to keep that old 100-pound backpack dragging that around through our life. It's time to let go. It's time to come back. It's time to turn the page. And sometimes, again, with our hand on our heart, we can understand, I think I need to let go of that grudge, or I need to let go of that old story that I've been telling myself about this person that keeps me back from being more open with them and more trusting and more sharing or more honest. And that there's so many things we can do. Also, an apology is part of resilience. You know, saying, you know what, going up to somebody we love and care about and saying, I owe you an apology. For so long, I haven't trusted that we could talk about this openly in a constructive way, and it would clear the tension that is between us. And I owe you an apology for not trusting us to be able to do that. And I'd like to do that now with you. I just want to clear the air. And I want us to be closer in the time to come. Sometimes we do that with an aging parent. Sometimes we do that with the person we're married to. Sometimes we do it with a sibling who we've been competing with since we were 7 years old. Sometimes we do it with a coworker, and we clear the path forward at work. Sometimes we're running a company, and we do that with our employees, and when we realize. And so resilience can come from you being awake and aware of the greater opportunities and possibilities.
Can hidden guilt, unprocessed guilt, survivor's guilt, can those things really short stop our grieving process?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't tell you how hard it was for me in the beginning. So I send my daughter on a study abroad program. And I tell her, this is going to be a launching pad for the rest of your life, because you're already aware that the world is bigger than the United States. It's bigger than California. It's bigger than what your parents have taught you. And you're going to go out into the world, and this is going to be a launching pad for the rest of your life. And my daughter dies 3 months later in India. And for a year, at least a year, Gwilda, I blame myself. I would say the loop that was in my mind and heart was, I sent my daughter to her death. How could I have been so arrogant and naive and stupid to let my daughter go on a study abroad trip, not knowing that there were no seat belts and safety belts on the buses that she would be riding on, that the program she was in had not put safety first and would overbook a flight and put kids on one of the most treacherous roads in the world, where 1,600 people at the time died every year. So for me, overcoming that guilt was a major problem, challenge. And I did it. The way I did it was, I would be in the presence of other parents that say, Ken, I didn't send my daughter to India on a study abroad program. I sent my daughter to the 7-Eleven to get milk. I didn't know there would be street racers out in front of 7-Eleven and that she would be caught in that. You didn't need to send your daughter out to the other side of the world. And I realized that guilt is such a devastating and a way to stop ourselves from grieving. We put ourselves in a courtroom with only a prosecuting attorney bringing up evidence. You sent your daughter, you told her it was going to be rather than saying with our hand on our heart, being a support, saying you would have given your life. You would still give your life right now for your daughter. You sent her on the trip of a lifetime. You only wanted goodness and love and light for your daughter. That's what you wanted. That's it. And I'm so sorry about what happened. And also, there are moments that we make attributions. Life is not fair. And we get stuck in the life is not fair, as well as getting stuck in guilt. And life is not fair means, I'm going to spit in the face of the universe. This happened on your watch, God. And until we can see a tear in the eye of God, a tear in the eye of the world or the universe, and to know that part of the universe is crying with us, is sorrowful with us, and that the attributions that we make to higher powers are really of our own invention. That, God may not be the puppeteer, God may be the force of love and goodness in the world. And we need to really rethink how guilt, and we need to rethink where we ascribe power, what makes the universe, instead of screaming at the casting director, understanding how this universe works, and that part of it is a grand mystery.
Well, it's that time in the show when I get to ask you, Dr. Ken, what's your mission?
My mission is to honor both of my daughters. It's a mission of service in the way that I live on and the way that I go on, by making my love, by leaving the legacy of love. I'm in that season of life, Gwilda, where we get to leave a legacy of chaos and indifference and avoidance, or we get to leave a legacy of love by doing good things in their name, by living a mission of service and being part of the solution, not the problem. Whether the solution is what's happening in our homes, our families, our hearts, our communities, our nation, our world, our environment, our planet. And for me, that's my mission, is to leave a legacy of love that my grandchildren and their children and all the generations to come will get to live in some of the blessings, gifts, and miracles that I've had in this lifetime. And that's what I'm going to do with the rest of whatever time I have.
It's a beautiful mission.
Thank you.
There's a theme running through your life and work. What is it?
The theme is how that we can go on. And that doesn't mean we can go on at any second, in any moment, in any way. And that going on means avoidance, hiding, denying, repressing, avoiding, running away from. It means facing into the truth. It means being honest. It's a code of courage. It means being courageous and brave, even if that means summoning newfound courage that we've never had before in our life. And that thread runs through how we go on, is the thread that runs through my life. It's answering and showing up in those what now moments, whether we're 20, 50, 80, or at the end of this extraordinary ride.
we're just about out of time altogether, but there's something that occurs to me is listening to you for the past hour. We don't go back to where we were before the grief hit. We can let it take us out, or as we go on, isn't that a form of evolution?
It is. It is. It marries beautifully with mission evolution. It's how we evolve on a personal level, but also epigenetically, because our children are watching and grandchildren are watching, and our community is watching how we show up. And if we really, really value, if we know what really matters, and we act on what really matters instead of acting on impulse and revenge, the false promise of revenge, and egotistical draw of attention to ourselves, which fades, which doesn't fill our hearts. If we fill our hearts with the right stuff, and we get to go on in this mystery in good ways. And what else? What more can we do? We're doing all we can do. And so I'm joining. That's why I told you I was honored to be on this program with Mission Evolution, because my life's work has been a mission of evolution.
Well, it is that magic moment. We are out of time. Dr. Ken, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your heart and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much for the invitation, for sharing your space with me.
My pleasure. Our guest this hour has been Dr. Ken Druck, the author of How We Go On: Self-Compassion, Courage, and Gratitude on the Path Forward. To find out more about Dr. Ken, where you can find his many books and all he has to offer, visit his website, kendruck.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy our past archived episodes on us, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.